Hello, and welcome to the sixth in this series of Django screencasts called Django from the Ground Up. In this episode, we'll be exploring how to add the toggle attendance button, as we can see here. Right here, if we click under Going, it toggles us to Attending, and then if we click it again, it registers us as not attending anymore. That's the functionality we're going to add. It looks relatively simple, but it's a little bit tricky to implement. Remember, all of the source code is already available on the site, and the complete source code is available by going to startthedark.com, scrolling down to the bottom, clicking on Open Source. There's a link to a GitHub repository and also to an issue tracker where you can file any bugs that you find. Also, any news will be posted here as we find it. One of the things that I'd like to do first is start out with some notes from last time. Last time we implemented the create function where we can create a new event. One of the assumptions that we make in this function is that the user is logged in when we assign request.user to event.creator. This is okay while we're testing it and working on it for ourselves, but before users can actually use the site, we have to make sure that they're logged in for real. The easiest way to do that is to use a decorator provided by Django. To do that, import the decorator from django.contrib.auth.decorators import login required. Then scroll down to the bottom and we just call the login required function on the actual create function itself. And then we need to reassign that back to the create function again. So we're actually calling a function on the create function and reassigning it back to create. Alternatively, if you use Python 2.4 or greater, you can simply call login required with the ampersand, but I prefer the more explicit style below. Doing this will ensure that the user is logged in by the time that they execute anything inside of this function. The other thing is that we simply use the URL navigation bar to navigate around the site. So we actually typed out create here. While that works in the short term, a better way to do that is to actually create a link. If we go to our template, we'll see that there's no way that we can actually navigate. If we'd like to navigate to the create page, a simple way to do that is by adding an anchor with a dynamic URL. So let's say href equals, and then let's type in what we want it to have. So we'll say create an event, and inside of here we can type URL, and then what we need to do is provide a name and possibly a list of arguments. So what name do we provide? Simply provide the name that we've specified under the URL's parameter under the name under the URL. So in this case, we just put in the URL evcreate. Django will figure out what the actual URL is and insert that here. To see this in action, we can start running our server, which it looks like I already have. Just to prove it, I'll restart it. And then we can go on to Events, Tonight. Under Create an Event, we can notice that when we hover over it, it's got Events Create. And we're good to go. Now let's move on to creating the toggle attendance button. The first thing we need to do is import the attendance model. Now we need to, for every event, we want to ensure that we're querying for whether the logged in user is actually attending that event. So one way that we can do that is by doing a batch query for all of the attendance objects where the event equals one of the events that we have. But that's a little bit tough to do right now. For right now, we're just going to loop over all of the events and check to see whether the currently logged in user is attending that event. Then we'll also be able to keep this in mind when we're later on trying to optimize our database calls, and then we can potentially speed it up later. So I'm going to first create an empty list, and it's going to be called attending. Then I'm going to loop over all of the events for event in events. Then I'm going to say try attendance.objects.get, and I'm going to say event equals e and user equals request.user. And then I'm going to accept attendance that does not exist. So let's just think about what we're doing here. For every event in all of the events, I'm going to try to query for an attendance object that matches that event and that user. If I can't find that, then I'm going to execute whatever I put down here. So if I can find it, I'm going to push a true value onto the attending list. Otherwise, I'm going to append a false value. Now we've got an events and an attending, and we need to somehow merge those together. The way that I'd like to do that is I'm going to use the zip function that's built into Python to merge two lists into two lists of two tuples. You'll see how that works in a second. So first we do events, and then we're going to do attending. Now since we've already looped over all of the events in events, we know that the attending and events are exactly the same size. Now in our tonight template, we can say event, comma, attending, and we will expand both our event and our attending into the event and the attending. Attending will be the Boolean that we already created. Let's just see if this worked. So we're going to say if attending you are, here, let's put it inside of a paragraph. You are attending this event. Else you are not attending this event. So we can go back to our web browser and see whether that's the case. Global name E is not defined. So let's go look in views.py, line 15. It looks like I absolutely have no clue what I was talking about. And it looks like I'm not attending this event, which is actually the truth. Now, if we go into the administration function, and we add an attendance from me to Dancing at the Boheme, and I hit save, it says now that I am attending the event, because the Boolean was true, and that was expanded into this attending variable, which we evaluated right here. Now, what we want to do now is add a form to allow to toggle this attending functionality. So, what we should do is we should probably create a function inside of our views, and it should be called toggle attendance. So let's do that right now. And we're going to take in the request, and then we're going to want to do we're going to assume that there's actually values in the post parameter. So try event event ID actually equals, and then we're going to cast whatever we grabbed to an int request.post event ID. Now there's a couple of different things that could have gone wrong. There could have not been an event ID in the post parameters, or there could have been a value that could not be cast to an int. So we're going to accept key error and value error. And if we get either of those things, we're going to raise an HTTP 404, which means that it couldn't be found. We also have to import that. And now we're ready to go. What I've done here is I've just called a convenience function called getObject or 404 for event, where the ID is equal to the event ID that we got here. And I'm assigning that to event. Checking to make sure that we've imported getObject or 404. It looks like we have not. What this will do is if it cannot find our object, it will actually raise an HTTP 404 exception. It just saves us some typing. Now, we can check to see whether we created the event, or we can actually go about toggling our attendance. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the getOrCreate function on attendance. And we're going to make sure that we're calling it for the user that is logged in and for the event that we've already queried for. If we didn't create the actual attendance event, then we're going to delete it. If we did create it, then we're going to say request.user.messageset.create, and the message is going to be, you are now attending, and let's pass in the name of the event. You know what? Let's actually change the way this flows. So we'll say if created and then else, instead of if not created, then if created. And then, if this is the case, let's say you are no longer attending that event. Now we're going to check to see whether there is a next variable in the post parameters. And if there isn't, we'll assign the empty string. And then we're going to say if there's no next, which means if it's the empty string, we'll redirect to the Tonight page. And we'll make sure that reverse is imported. It looks like it was, because we used it elsewhere. And then we're going to redirect to that next variable. So return HTTP response redirect to next. Now we made many assumptions that the user was logged in here, so we're going to need to call that decorator. So we'll do toggle attendance equals login required toggle attendance. Now, that's a lot of code, and we really can't test it out yet because we have to create a form. So, let's go back to our Tonight, and let's say form method equals post, and we'll say class equals toggle attendance form, so that we can target it later. And let's say if attending input class equals attendance unattend, type equals submit, value equals unattend, else we're going to do the exact same thing, only the unattend will be attend, and we can end our if statement. Now, all we need to do is simply add some hidden fields to this form so that we can pass the information required to the toggle attendance view. Now we notice that there's a event ID that's needed, and there's also a next that's possibly wanted as well. Let's just do the event tonight, or the event ID. So we'll do input type equals hidden, name equals event ID, value equals event.id. Very, very simple. And now if we note, we're going to be redirected to the Tonight page, which is just fine because that's the page that we're editing right now. The one last thing that we need to do is map a URL for this. So what we can do is simply look here at what we've got already. We're going to add a URL, and I'm actually just going to look quick at a reference here so that I know exactly what I'm doing. And it looks like I want to write a URL that says, first start with R. I'm going to say toggle attendance. And then views.toggle attendance, like we wrote, and the name will be EV toggle attendance. And let's just try and make this a little prettier. We'll put this down here, put that down there, and this as well. Put a comment because I know we're going to put more stuff. And so now in here we need to make this action go somewhere. So we'll do action equals, and then we're going to use the same method that we used before. So URL EV toggle attendance. And that should be good. We should be able to simply fire up our browser and navigate to this page. Now, that's a lot of code. I would be very interested to see whether this works. So let's click unattend. And it looks like we got a 404. So let's just look at our source code and see what we've got. Oh, very simple mistake. I forgot to put the squiggly braces around the event.id. Okay, and I also can't type. So here we go. Let's see if that works. First I have to reload the page. I'm going to click unattend, and it worked. We have completely solved the problem of attendance versus unattendance. So that is the end of this screencast, and I hope that you've learned a few things about how to set up a toggle attendance button for this. And we haven't used Django's forms for this. We actually wired it up ourselves because it was so simple. And we also learned a little bit about URLs. So hopefully that was good, and I will be back very soon with another screencast.